I'm Shane Morris with the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. The sports world was rocked earlier this week with the death of NBA superstar Kobe Bryant. Today on the BreakPoint podcast, basketball fan John Stonestreet talks with Dr. Owen Strand about the impact a celebrity's passing can have on all of us, even Christians. What does this say about us? Can, or maybe how, do sports and athletic achievement reflect the image of God? And what made Bryant the superstar he was? Here are John Stonestreet and Owen Strand.
Well, welcome to the BreakPoint podcast. I should say maybe a somewhat odd, unexpected, certainly unexpected on a number of levels topic that we're going to talk about today. I'm guessing that when people want kind of hard-hitting sports analysis, they're not tuning into the BreakPoint podcast. But on Sunday morning, we heard the news that one of the iconic figures from the National Basketball Association, really one of the greatest basketball players to ever play the game in the NBA. Many people think that he would be on the Mount Rushmore of the NBA if there were one, passed away. Kobe Bryant died in a helicopter crash. And not only that, but his daughter, Gianna, who's 13 years old, also died along with 9 others, or 9 total, I think, that passed away in the helicopter crash. And it's really been a shaking sort of event. And it was one of those events. There are some events that I think tell us a lot about ourselves, and this is one of them. And so I want to have a conversation about sports, about basketball, about Kobe's legacy, also about death and suffering. And I also want to talk about all of these things from a Christian worldview. And privileged to welcome on a friend of mine who, as I was thinking, I was like, who else is a big basketball fan like I am? And Dr. Owen Strand, Associate Professor of Christian Theology and the Director of the Center for Public Theology at the Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, joins me now. Dr. Strand, Owen, great to have you here on the BreakPoint podcast.
Thank you, John. It's great to be with you and appreciate the opportunity.
So you're a big hoops fan like I am. I don't know what it was like for you. I mean, it was kind of stunning. It was like a John Lennon moment. It was kind of like, I don't want to say a 9/11 moment. That's probably not the right analogy, nor Martin Luther King, assassination of Martin Luther King moment. But there is something when we have the kind of the death of an icon that we walk through on Sunday, hearing about Kobe Bryant. I was a big Kobe Bryant fan. I guess at some level, Owen, I was a little surprised by my mourning, by my sadness. I mean, it's a sad thing, but it seemed to hit me at a pretty personal and deep level. Did you have the same experience?
I did. It hit me hard. I mean, I grew up with Kobe, so I was in high school in Maine from 1995 to 99. So that was right when Kobe really exploded, that period. And I mean, I wasn't a Kobe fan myself. I had his Adidas shoes way back in the day and always thought he was cool and thought he was supremely talented and had a ferocious will. And I admired a lot about him. But I was a Celtics fan. And so, as I said, I wasn't strictly speaking a Kobe Bryant fan. Nonetheless, I mean, I can remember he took Brandy, the famous pop singer, to prom. I remember when he was, a high schooler going into the NBA and drafted by Jerry West and making all-star teams early on. He won 5 rings. And I witnessed all of that. And I watched, I'm guessing this is true with you too, John. We're both basketball aficionados. I watched probably hundreds and thousands of hours of Kobe Bryant basketball games. So this is a man who, in a certain way, shaped some of my life. And yes, when I heard the news, honestly, I felt like a very close friend or even like a family member in the broader family circle had died. It felt like that. And the fact that his daughter died with him and then 7 other people, including, another child and other people. I mean, it hit very hard.
I think there's something about the human condition, obviously, in which, the deaths of celebrities or icons hit us hard. But I guess part of me struggled yesterday, not only that it hit me in the same way, and it did, Owen, because, like this all happened kind of when I was growing up watching the game. I mean, I was a big Laker fan. Hopefully you and I can still be friends. Growing up, I put my support behind Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and you grew up a Larry Bird fan in the Northeast. And that's one of the iconic rivalries in all of sports history. And the rivalry really died down until, really the resurrection of Kobe and Kevin Garnett, and there was that epic finals again. And Kobe gave kind of life again to the Lakers franchise in a very, very real way. And Jerry West talked on Sunday about the loss, and you could just see for him it was like one of his kids or one of his grandkids. And, when you have that sort of personal relationship with someone, then it hits really hard. And I guess what I was struggling with in an age of celebrity, in an age of sports, why it hit me the same way. Like, I just couldn't stop watching the coverage. It was like that deep gut level feeling. And sports were a huge part of my life, Owen. I don't know if they were for you. Mm-hmm. And now as somebody who deals with kind of the importance of ideas and obviously wanting to see the kingdom of a God advance, I guess at some level I struggled with why it hit me that deeply and whether it's okay or not for it to hit me that deeply. Does that make any sense? Like, we all struggle with idols in our life. Sports can certainly be an idol. Is it okay for sports to be important without being an idol?
Man, what a good set of questions, and what important questions today, honestly, John. I don't think they're retrograde questions or third order, or unimportant. I was talking to a friend earlier, a California guy who loved Kobe like you, and we were talking together about how we don't raise kids anymore, and they have to work in wheat fields 6 days a week for 8 hours a day or whatever and go to school on the side. We just don't. At least in America, a lot of us live in a relatively prosperous context where our kids don't have to chip in to put bread on the table. At least a good number of people don't. They can do things like work on their basketball handle, like work on their jump shot, kick a soccer ball in a net, these sorts of things. And so there are many different things we need to observe about sports. You can idolize sports. I actually think that was part of my story. I think I got too into basketball, to be very honest with you. So part of my journey as a Christian has been putting sports very much in proper perspective, not worshiping sports, not worshiping my place in sports, these sorts of things. I think it is complex as a society because I think people do worship celebrities today. And I think people do take unserious things seriously and serious things unseriously. There's a lot to say here, but also what we need to say about sports. I feel kind of similarly about superhero movies today. I'm not a huge proponent of superhero movies. Like, I'm not over here throwing stones at them or something, but I don't love them myself that much. But I've realized, John, that superheroes, like sports figures, give men something of a language of heroism and striving for excellence and those sorts of virtues, and B, for all of us, for everyone out there, point us to figures that are greater than us, point us to sacrifice for others, these kind of things. And so I do think Kobe strove for greatness in a kind of traditional way. He was a figure who sought excellence in his craft, in his field. He worked extremely hard. He had a ferocious will. And so we're sorting these things out. There's a lot to say. There certainly are some positive aspects of his legacy, I think, that are part of why people like you and me and many, many others feel such a grief over this.
Yeah, I mean, and it's been one of those kind of iconic moments, certainly in sports history. I'm trying to think of, is there a comparative event that has happened that we can look back, 30, 40, 50 years where we had a loss like this so unexpectedly, someone of such prominence. I suppose, if you think about the plane crash of Marshall University, but you're not talking about a kind of a singular figure there in the same way, nor about even a program that certainly would have any sort of stature like the career of Kobe did. I mean, it's almost like it's unprecedented. And, kind of thinking about what can I learn about myself through this and what can I learn about kind of the cultural moment. And I found it so fascinating to see the tributes come in, because the two things that are mentioned, obviously, is just how hard he worked to be the absolute best player that he could be. And I think there's few players that have that sort of work ethic. And what does that tell us? But then also, man, the relationship that seemed to emerge between him and his family, especially his daughters. I saw I don't know if you saw this, Owen, but a clip from just a few months ago when he was on Jimmy Kimmel Live, and he's talking about his daughter. First of all, let's just put this in perspective. One of the 5 greatest players in NBA history, I'd be willing to put him there, right? 5, maybe 6 greatest players in NBA history. Spent his post-retirement years coaching an 11th and 12-year-old girls basketball team. Make some sense. Make some sense of that. I mean, it was funny because they were joking about how hard he was on the girls, and he made them sleep outside. It was all joking, right, and so on. But the pictures of affection between him and his daughter. And do you have daughters? I have 3 daughters. Do you have daughters?
2 daughters, yes.
I was thinking a lot about basketball and the highlights and these iconic moments. The 81-point game. Good heavens, his last game when he scored 60 and literally put the team on his back and hit the game winner. I mean, it was storybook. You couldn't have made it up. It was like a WWE kind of contrived sports event, it almost seemed like, because it was so iconic. But I was thinking about that, but I was thinking about his daughter and the commitment that he had to his family. Many people point back to, obviously came out of a pretty dramatic scandal.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well, John. I have an 11-year-old girl, Gigi, his daughter, who died along with 7 other people, was, I think, 13. And so very similar age as my oldest daughter. And that is part of why, absolutely, this crash landed into so many of our days. I mean, it would be enough for Kobe Bryant just himself to die. But then for this daughter that he clearly loved, I mean, you see the videos of the 2 of them interacting that have been online the last few days, and that had been online actually for some time, capturing that I think he was quite close to her. And he had, as you just mentioned, a real development in his life as a man. He was not much of a family man early on in his marriage and times in his career early on, but it seemed over time that he developed and grew into it. Marriage and fatherhood are so good for many men just in natural terms. And it seems like, I didn't know Kobe Bryant, I just watched it from afar, read about him. It seemed like that happened in his life, that as he leaned into his family, he found greater purpose. He realized he wasn't able anymore to define himself by athletic exploits. And so he just dedicated himself to raising his girls and passing on that athletic, hunger to win and those sorts of qualities. I had friends in California in his area who said that it wasn't just, cameras that would show up and he'd put out cones on the court and act like a good dad. He really was an involved, caring father. And he went hard. Let's not sugarcoat Kobe Bryant. I mean, he chewed up teammates. He fought with coaches. He had a tremendous ego. And yet, here's a man, like we're talking about, who was effectively calmed, tamed in some way, in a healthy way, by the family. And that's, what God has in mind for so many of us, though most of us don't get 5 championship rings to wear on our fingers.
Shane Morris here again. We'll get right back to John Stonestreet and Owen Strand in just a moment. One of our most popular offers of the year expires in just a few days. Before the end of January, you can get your subscription to World Magazine in exchange for a donation to the Colson Center. This offer includes 24 print issues, as well as full access to digital content from a trusted news source that's grounded in hope and biblical truth. You can give today and receive your subscription at breakpoint.org/January. That's breakpoint.org/January. Now back to John Stonestreet and Owen Strachan.
A lot of people have, sent out condolences, certainly, and prayers for his wife, who's now left with 3 daughters, having lost her husband and her oldest daughter. I mean, that's just a tragedy of epic proportions, no matter who we're talking about. And, you talk about that turn back towards his family. One of the critical junctures there, of course, was a trial for rape and sexual assault, of which he was ultimately settled out of court. And, he talked about very rarely, made some acknowledgments, but, obviously very hard to know anything about the details other than it was wrong and it was unfaithful to his wife.
Yes, that's right.
But his wife stuck with him. And she seems to have become quite a stabilizing influence. And, one of the things you mentioned earlier that I want to come back to when you talked about superheroes, and you're like, there's not a lot in our culture anymore that domesticates men while allowing them to be who, the driven, passionate builders, that God has largely put into us as men. And this is one of the things you and I talk so much about, and you also in your work with Council for Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, that first of all, all masculinity is not toxic, that there's a God-given goodness to masculinity, and then in a very unique way, what only marriage can do brings that out of us. And sometimes it's marriage forgiving in the only way that it can happen. And so I think about kind of what Kobe's wife has woken up to this morning, and think about kind of what her strength and stability did for him. And it really points to deeper truths about men and women and about marriage.
It certainly does. I think that was beautifully said, John. And I just have chills just thinking about, like you said, a wife waking up without her husband. Here he is, 41 years old. And here we are, all of us, stretching out our lives and our planning. Okay, well, in 40 years, this is where we'll be. And here's where the retirement accounts hopefully will get to, and all these sorts of things. And in reality, not a minute is promised. But wow, yes, that's exactly right. Kobe, I think, really did need his wife, and he needed his children to ground him. And we need that, those of us who are not high-flown athletes, just as much. They had their rocky times. It's very clear. She filed for divorce, I believe, in 2010. So that's in the wake of the matters you talked about a minute ago. And it took them months and months to reconcile. I think that's part of actually what drew people to Kobe. In a weird way, he was way above us in terms of his vertical leap and his athletic accomplishments.
Speak for yourself, buddy. You've never seen me jump.
Yeah. That is true. I've heard legends, but
they are exactly that, legends. That's right. Crazy. You should not believe them legends if you ever heard them.
Yes. Yes. I want to see video someday. But anyway, he was this high flyer in a literal sense, but he also was human. And what I found fascinating, I didn't know him to be an evangelical Christian, born again. I think he was involved with the Catholic Church in different ways, but I didn't hear a born again confession of faith from him. But it was clear that he and Vanessa, his wife, went to the mat in a positive way and worked it out. They had several more children, and that gives us a sense that the marriage was fruitful and happy to a degree. He spoke in an interview I read just the last couple of days of, having to work through conflict in marriage. And Kobe was always that way, John. He was a straight shooter. He wasn't glossed over like so many superstars. He would talk about difficulties in his life, and he talked about difficulties in his marriage. A lot of people understand that. Marriage is hard in a fallen world. You have to fight for it. Men have to fight their flesh, our flesh, to be a Christ-like head. In an Ephesians 5 sense, women have to fight the flesh to submit to a husband, an earthly man, in a church-like way, an Ephesians 5 way. This isn't easy stuff we're talking about. It's not easy as Christians. It's not easy for those of us who are not Christians. So they were a real-life couple who fought for their marriage. How few people fight for their marriage today. They fought for it, and that's part of what makes it so sad, because they had seemed to have found some stability in their marriage.
Yeah, in 2011, Vanessa Bryant files for divorce. 2 years later, she withdrew her petition. And Bryant said in an interview with GQ, and I'm just looking at an article, and we'll link to this if you go to breakpoint.org, and we'll link to this article, that he decided not to give up on his marriage. And it was a conversation with his priest. And he grew up Catholic, grew up for a while in Italy. That's well known. There's certainly some mourning happening in Italy. And really turned back to his Catholic faith after this event. Just listen to this. This is really interesting. He said, it was actually kind of funny. The priest looks at me. This was after he goes to him about, the accusations and the filing for divorce and so on, and says, "Did you do it?" And I say, "Of course not." Then he asked, "Do you have a good lawyer?" And I was like, "Yeah, he's phenomenal." And then he just said, "Let it go. Move on. God's not going to give you anything you can't handle. It's in his hands now. This is something you can't control. Let it go." And that was the turning point. And somehow he fights for his marriage for 2 years. It is. It's just not the way this story ends, especially among celebrities. And, maybe something to kind of point to some hope in terms of, where he is now and so on. Let me ask you this. Let's go to the sports side of things real quick. What was your favorite Kobe moment? Wait, maybe as a Celtics fan, we could say, what was your least favorite Kobe moment? That one's clear, is in that iconic finals.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My favorite Kobe moment was 2008 when my Celtics beat him in 5 games. But he had so many amazing moments. I loved, in watching some highlights the last couple of days, I loved his dunks. I loved his athleticism. I loved, sorry. You know what I love the most about Kobe, John? He was a two-way player, okay? And I mean this in a genuine sense. This isn't just, from a distance, Celtics fan, half praise. No. Kobe Bryant wasn't like a lot of players seem to be today, including top players. Kobe Bryant went all out on offense. A lot of guys want to do that, right? That's where the numbers show up. But he also went all out on defense, something like 11-time All-NBA first or second team defense.
That's crazy.
Is fantastic.
I mean, they're really that's one of the things that makes him have to be in the same conversation with Michael Jordan on a sports level, right? I mean, many people forget that Jordan was also Defensive Player of the Year, as well as obviously, one of the best scorers of all time. And Kobe played really, really hard. Two moments stand out to me. One is something that Tiger Woods mentioned in his interview, and that was a stunning thing on Sunday where essentially 5 minutes after he finds out walking off the 18th green at whatever golf tournament he was playing in, he's asked about it, and he mentions, he pops his Achilles tendon and goes back and hits 2 free throws. I mean, there's something about – that's a Willis Reed sort of, story. And then, of course, I hadn't watched Kobe a lot near the end of his career. Lakers were terrible, near the end of his career and so on. But his final game where it was like he defied age, right? He scored 60 points.
Yes.
And again, put him on his back. I mean, the 81-point game was just stunning, but that was – and many people forget, too. I mean, his 5 championship came in repeats. That's another stunning thing. I mean, that's your Jordan-esque, sort of career where you have 3 straight ones when he's playing with Shaq, and then, after a couple years has back-to-back again for 5 championships. That's really an amazing – feat as well. My guest today is Dr. Owen Strand, and we're talking about basketball. We're talking about Kobe Bryant. We're talking about death, the Christian worldview, the role of sports, and just trying to make sense of this, not only this situation, but really our cultural response to this devastating loss and death of Kobe Bryant and his daughter and 7 others in a helicopter crash in California on Sunday, but also our personal response as athletes and where that comes from. Owen, your last book is a book on the theology of mankind. One of the things we've talked about at the Colson Center is how important the image of God, the idea of the image of God is. Chuck Colson would say oftentimes it's the most important thing other than the message of salvation itself that Christianity gave to the world, this idea that humans are made in God's image. I don't know the role sports played in your life. You mentioned earlier that maybe it was an idol. I walked that line. It clearly was an idol for a long time for me. And yet I look back and I think about how formative it was. One of the interesting things about Kobe is that so many people come out of a career like that and don't know what to do next. They're lost. Kobe found purpose, direction. He won an Oscar, for heaven's sake. I don't even know how you do. I mean, that's just weird to go from, one of the great NBA players of all time to win an Oscar. But I guess my point is sports was so formative to me. It wasn't an end. It was a means. And I'm grateful for 2 coaches in particular that I had. My high school basketball coach, Ron Combs, Little Christian School in Northern Virginia. My college basketball coach, Morris Mahalski, who now does amazing work with Athletes in Action. These guys saw basketball as a means. My high school coach used to say that his job was to put people in a position to win. And he did that in my life. He put me in a position to win. Connect for me. Sorry, it's a setup and it's a long open-ended question. I'm going to let you go with it. How does sports reflect the image of God? We know how it can be idolatrous. How does sports reflect the image of God, and does it?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, fundamentally, God is the creator, right? That's how we first learn about the Lord. It's not actually a savior or other categories that the Bible will give us. It's his creator. Well, we take it out of very technical terms as Christians, right? But think about it. God is being creative. God is making a master work, a masterpiece that will reflect his glory exactly as he intends it. And the apex of this master work is humanity made on the 6th day. And so, yeah, I think humanity images God in a very powerful way, gives a little tiny picture of the magnificence of Almighty God when we create, when we use our God-given talents and intellect and other abilities to make something, to form something, to push ahead, to grow. And so I think when you're watching an athlete, when you're watching an artist, when you're watching somebody who's very good in their vocation or their field in various ways, building a business from the ground up, can be tons of different things, right, John? I mean, you are seeing somebody who is living out the image of God. I don't think the image of God personally is a quality that waxes or wanes in us. I think we are the image of God. We're all fully human by virtue of being image bearers, which is why when you're looking at a tiny baby in the womb, right, on an ultrasound, you're seeing the image of God. When you're looking at an elderly person in the nursing home, an elderly person who used to know your name but no longer does, you're looking at the image of God. When you're looking at, your spouse across the table, the same spouse you've seen for 20, 30 years or whatever, you're looking at the image of God. Now we need to be remade in the image of Christ. The New Testament teaches us, Romans 8:29 and other texts. So we need to be changed by the gospel such that we truly glorify God and know him savingly. Nonetheless, every human person, I believe, is an image bearer. When you're looking at another human person, you're looking at the image of God. When we watched Kobe Bryant, we were watching our artistic, athletic excellence. And we don't need to be ashamed of saying that. When we see, I'll say this last point as well, when we see somebody working really hard, not for something evil, but working hard for something that's either neutral or positive or virtuous, that's another reflection of the image. That's in a human person, even, whether that person knows Christ or not as Savior, that's a little reflection of our Creator God. And that is something I really did take away from Kobe Bryant, like Michael Jordan before him. And it's something that impressed itself upon me, and I can tell upon you and upon so many others who came to love basketball in part in the last 20, 30 years because of those two men. It's ferocity of will. It's John Calipari used to call it, the famous coach, he used to call it refuse to lose, a refuse to lose mentality.
The Mamba mentality, right? I mean, that's what we heard from Kobe, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't personally have, games with thousands of people coming to them to settle and apply that mentality to. I don't. I'm actually done playing pickup now too. But I can have that ferocity of will in a spirit-shaped way applied throughout my life. In other words, honestly, I look at an example like that, and in some way I'm nudged, John, to fight for my marriage, to fight for my children, to raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, to fight for my local church, to strengthen it however I can, to fight for what is good, true, and beautiful in this world. We shouldn't look at athletes and marvel at their will, because athletic ability is as more about will than it is about physical talent. We should look at them and think, I need to go hard. I need to refuse to lose in my own life.
Yeah. My guest today has been Dr. Owen Strand, Associate Professor of Christian Theology at the Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's also the director of the Center for Public Theology there, author of the book Reenchanting Humanity, which is a systematic theology having to do with the image of God. It's really a terrific book. And we've been talking about Kobe Bryant. Come to breakpoint.org and we'll link you to some of the articles that we mentioned on today's program, maybe a highlight film or two. I don't know if we talked a lot about Michael Jordan at the same time. Somebody has put together a mashup of their highlights. Have you seen that video where basically it's just like they're a mirror image of each other? I'll forward it to you offline here.
Cool.
It's a remarkable highlight video. But I just appreciate that last thought, because I think one of the most helpful theological structures or frameworks that I have heard comes out of the Reformed tradition. It's just this idea of structure and direction, that God has created things structurally good, and part of that is our ability as human beings to make something of the world, to imagine things that aren't there and use our drive and hard work to put them there, but that we have misdirected those good gifts. And that includes our creativity and our drive and our energy and our authority and all the things. And I think sports is that way. And some of the things you see reflected in sports are structurally good but can be directionally bad. And I think having that lesson that you brought out, which is let's keep those two things straight, but let's not call bad what God created as part of us as being good. Let's let Christ redeem it. Let's let the Holy Spirit renew it and energize it. And let's do it for things that ultimately matter and for which we were created for, and the kingdom of God is all about. Again, Owen has been my guest today. Owen, tell folks where they can follow you if they want to find you online or Twitter or wherever else.
Oh, I appreciate it, John. Thank you. My Twitter is at OSTRACHAN. I'm sure everybody's going to get that. Great ease. It looks like at O Strachan. It's a Scottish last name with a Gaelic pronunciation. And then I lead the center that you mentioned, the Center for Public Theology at Midwestern Seminary in Kansas City. And the website there is cpt.mbts.edu. So thank you for that, John.
All right. And thanks all of you for joining us for the BreakPoint podcast.
Thanks for listening to the BreakPoint podcast. And remember, for another couple of days, you can get a 1-year subscription to World Magazine with your gift to BreakPoint and the Colson Center during the month of January. Just come to breakpoint.org/January for more details. That's breakpoint.org/January. For the Colson Center, I'm Shane Morris.